hidden away in the brittle records of the Darbisha County archives. There exists a terrifying mystery that has haunted paranormal researchers for over a century. The tale of Elias Graves, the 8-year-old boy whose unsettling gaze in his final photograph earned him the chilling moniker, the Boy of 111. This is Victorian England, in 1885, a time of rigorous precision and scientific order. Elias was the only, deeply cherished child of Henry Graves, a highly respected clock and watchmaker, and his educated wife, Margaret. Their 3-story Georgian home in Ashborne was a shrine to time, filled with 23 perfectly synchronized clocks. This obsessive precision with time would ultimately make the events that unfolded there impossible to explain away. Elias's last photograph was taken on October 3, 1885. 27 days later, Elias Graves vanished from his locked bedroom at precisely 11:11 p.m. and was never seen again. But the true horror lies not in the vanishing, but in the 27 nights leading up to it, a meticulously documented pattern of impossible events witnessed by his parents and investigated by local authorities who could find absolutely no rational explanation. This is the story of a boy who began disappearing every single night, only to return from a place he couldn't describe until the night he didn't. Make sure to subscribe to the Forgotten Liturgy and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Drop a comment and tell me what state you're listening from. I love knowing where our audience discovers these forgotten chapters of American history. The first incident occurred on October 4th, 1885, just one day after the photograph was taken. Late that night, Margaret Graves was woken by the light, quick sound of footsteps pacing the hallway. Thinking Elias had simply gotten up, she waited. But when the pacing continued, she rose to investigate. The hallway was empty. Margaret woke Henry, and they found Elias downstairs in the parlor, standing barefoot and silent, staring intently at the grandfather clock. He appeared to be in a trance. When Henry touched him, Elias woke violently, confused and disoriented. He claimed the last thing he remembered was lying in his bed. Assuming it was an isolated incident of sleepwalking, they put Elias back to bed and decided to keep his bedroom door locked at night to prevent accidents. But the very next night, October 5th, it happened again. This time, when Henry discovered the boy was missing, the door to Elias's room was locked from the inside. This was no ordinary sleepwalking. This was the beginning of an impossible horror. This time, when Henry discovered the boy was missing, the door to Elias's room was locked from the inside. This was no ordinary sleepwalking. This was the beginning of an impossible horror. Henry had been working late, and on his way upstairs, he saw a light under the studied door, a room they rarely used. He found Elias there, standing by the window in a trance. Henry noted that the door had been closed, meaning Elias would have had to open it, suggesting purposeful movement inconsistent with sleepwalking. When Henry woke him, Elias again had no memory of leaving, but this time he whispered something unsettling. "Papa, I was somewhere else. Somewhere cold." The next night, October 6th, Henry and Margaret were determined. They locked Elias's door from the outside and kept the key. Yet, the following morning, Elias revealed the terrifying truth. "I didn't leave my room, Mama, but I still went somewhere." He couldn't explain what he meant, but Margaret noted in her diary that he seemed genuinely terrified of something he couldn't remember. On the night of October 7th, they checked on him, door locked, sleeping peacefully. But shortly after 11 p.m., Margaret was jolted awake by a sound she described as a clock striking, but rung discordant. Jarring, they heard light, quick footsteps coming from downstairs. Henry rushed to Elias's door. It was still locked. He fumbled with the key, threw open the door, and the bed was empty. They found Elias shivering violently in the kitchen, standing in complete darkness and staring at the wall. His feet were dirty, as if he had been walking outside, yet every door and window in the house was locked from the inside. This time, when they woke him, Elias began to sob. "I don't want to go back there," he cried. Margaret held him close and asked where he went. "The cold place," Elias whispered. "The place where someone is counting." The next morning, October 8th, Henry found a chilling piece of evidence that turned their concern into terror. 5 different clocks scattered throughout the house timepieces. He prided himself on maintaining had all stopped at the exact same time. 11:11 p.m. Henry initially dismissed it, resetting the clocks. But that night, Henry and Margaret decided to stay awake and keep watch over Elias's locked door. At 11:09 p.m., the house was still. At 11:10 p.m., Margaret noticed the quiet ticking begin to slow down, gradually, simultaneously. At 11:11 p.m., every clock in the house stopped ticking. The silence was absolute and deeply unsettling. Before either of them could speak, Tay heard it, the sound of Elias's door opening and closing, and footsteps descending the stairs. But the door remained closed and locked. Henry rushed downstairs, but Elias was nowhere to be found. Then, at precisely 11:14 p.m., they heard slow footsteps from the third floor. They raced back upstairs. Elias's door was still locked. Henry threw it open. Elias was back in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his skin cold and his shirt damped with sweat. As Elias slowly focused on his mother, he asked, "Where did I go?" Henry insisted he never left. "But I wasn't here," Elias insisted, starting to cry. "I was in the cold place again, and someone was there. Someone was counting 1, 2, 3, 4. They kept counting. And Mama, I think they were counting nights." At that exact moment, 11:15 p.m., every clock in the house began ticking again, perfectly synchronized. Henry and Margaret realized they were dealing with something utterly beyond their understanding. To seek help, they brought in Margaret's practical, sensible sister, Beatrice Caldwell, who arrived on October 10th. Beatrice, initially skeptical, agreed to observe. She found Elias to be a normal child by day, but as evening approached, Elias grew withdrawn. He begged his parents to let him stay up, terrified of being alone when the clock struck 11. On the night of October 10th, Beatrice prepared to witness the phenomenon herself. She, Margaret, and Henry positioned themselves throughout the house to observe every detail. Beatrice stationed herself right outside Elias's locked door. At 11:09 p.m., Beatrice heard the clocks begin to slow. This time, when Henry discovered the boy was missing, the door to Elias's room was locked from the inside. This was no ordinary sleepwalking. This was the beginning of an impossible horror. On the night of October 10th, Beatrice prepared to witness the phenomenon herself. She, Margaret, and Henry positioned themselves throughout the house, with Beatrice right outside Elias's unlucky door. At 11:09 p.m., she heard the ticking begin to slow. By 11:11 p.m., there was absolute silence. Then, from inside the locked room, Beatrice heard a sound that chilled her blood. A sudden displacement of air, like wind rushing through a closed space. She unlocked the door and threw it open. The bed was empty. The room was cold, unnaturally colder than it should have been. Beatrice saw her breath misting in the lamplight. Then, Margaret screamed from downstairs. Beatrice rushed down to find Margaret staring at Elias in the scullery, standing in the corner. "He just appeared," Margaret whispered, claiming the spot had been empty moments before. When they turned Elias around, his eyes were closed, and he was mumbling repeatedly. 27, 26. 25, 24. He was counting backwards. When they woke him, his skin was ice cold, and his bare feet had what looked like frost marks, despite there being no snow anywhere. At 11:14 p.m., the clocks started ticking again, and 3 more had stopped permanently at 11:11 p.m. The next morning, Henry went straight to Dr. Lawrence Fletcher, the town physician, presenting his meticulous journals. Dr. Fletcher, a man of clinical precision, examined Elias and found him physically healthy, yet severely anxious. Dr. Fletcher agreed to stay the night of October 11th, along with the family and Reverend Albert Morrison. At 11:09 p.m., Dr. Fletcher noted in his report that the clocks objectively began to slow. At 11:10 p.m., Elias, sleeping peacefully moments before, began to mumble and breathe rapidly. Then, at the exact moment the clocks went silent to 11:11 p.m., Elias Graves vanished from his bed. Dr. Fletcher, sitting 3 feet away, testified. Between one moment and the next, the child simply ceased to be there. The door was locked. The window latched. It was impossible. 3 minutes later, they heard sounds from the attic. Henry and Dr. Fletcher found Elias lying unconscious, covered in a thin layer of frost that melted before their eyes. When revived, Elias kept repeating, "I saw them counting. They're counting down the nights." When the Reverend asked where he went, Elias cried, "From when they got lost. Like I'm getting lost. They said I'm almost ready. They said when they finish counting, I can stay with them." That night, the adults debated the impossible. Dr. Fletcher, the man of science, was shaken. The boy vanished from a locked room. This defies every natural law. Yet I saw it. Reverend Morrison suspected a demonic affliction, but Henry Graves, staring at his motionless clocks, proposed a terrifying theory. What if this has something to do with time itself? What if Elias is somehow falling out of time? The subsequent days brought repeated, escalating incidents. Every night, at exactly 11:11 p.m., Elias would vanish for 3 minutes, returning colder, more confused, and more frightened. On October 16th, he was found in the locked workshop. Surrounded by disassembled clocks he had somehow taken apart with impossible precision. On October 19th, he was discovered standing on the very edge of the roof, saved only by Henry's quick action. Each time, he returned with the same message. They're still counting. The number is getting smaller. By October 20th, Elias was terrified of the dark, begging his parents to keep him awake. His schoolteacher described him as pale, hollow-eyed, and looking at the house's clocks with absolute dread. Neighbors testified to hearing strange sounds like wind rushing or a door slamming at Hoost after 11 p.m. on October 24th. Elias began to describe the cold place with more clarity. "It's like here, but not here," he told his mother. "It's like here, but not here." Elias told his mother, "Everything is the same houses, the same streets, the same church, but there's no one there. It's empty and cold and silent. And when I'm there, I can see things. I can see forward and backward." When Margaret asked what he meant, Elias chilled her to the bone. "I can see the night when I do, and come back. I can see you and Papa looking for me. I can see all the people in the cold place, and they're not counting anymore because they've reached one." Henry Graves, desperate to save his son, commit an act of final desperation. On October 28th, just 3 days before the final vanishing, he gathered all 23 clocks in the house and smashed them, destroying his life's work to break the connection. It made no difference. At 11:11 p.m., Elias still vanished. When he returned, he looked at the empty space where the grandfather clock once stood and whispered, "It doesn't matter, Papa. They're not counting with our clocks. They're counting with something older." The night of October 30th, 1885, arrived, the final countdown. Henry, Margaret, Beatrice, Dr. Fletcher, and Reverend Morrison gathered in Elias's room. Elias was holding his parents' hands. "They've reached 3. Mama," he said, "after tonight, there are only 2 nights left, and then it will be my turn to stay." As 11:11 p.m. arrived, the pulling sensation began, intense and overwhelming. They all felt Ida force trying to tear Elias away. Margaret screamed, refusing to let go. Then, the air in the room shimmered and distorted. Dr. Fletcher testified seeing a fractional glimpse of somewhere else, a gray, empty room filled with translucent, waiting figures. Elias screamed and was instantly yanked away. His body vanished from the bed with a sensation like something tearing. They held the phantom grip of his hands for a moment, and then he was gone. For 3 frantic minutes, they searched the house. But at 11:14 p.m., there was no sound of Elias reappearing. 4 minutes passed, then 5. Elias did not return. On October 31st, 1885, the night Elias predicted, Henry sat alone in his workshop among the broken clock remains. At 11:11 p.m., he heard it faintly, a voice he knew, coming from everywhere and nowhere. 1. And then silence. Elias Graves was never found. The case was classified as an unexplained disappearance. Margaret suffered a nervous breakdown. Henry closed his workshop, dying 4 years later of a broken heart. Decades later, researchers like Professor David Winters documented 17 similar cases of children vanishing at specific recurring times, often involving clocks malfunctioning. Winters posed the terrifying question: what if at certain moments, the barrier between our time and some other time becomes thin enough that vulnerable individuals can slip through? The only physical evidence remaining is Elias's photograph from October 3rd, 1885. Those who view it report being deeply unsettled. Some claim, if you look closely at the grandfather clock in the image, the hands are positioned at exactly 11:11. And there are those who claim that if you stare long enough, you can see a faint shimmer beside the clock, like someone standing in the cold place, looking back at us from somewhere outside of time. Local legend maintains that if you stand outside the house at 11:11 p.m. on October 30th, you can sometimes hear a faint voice counting backwards. 3, 2, 1. The case of Elias Graves remains one of the most thoroughly documented and least explained disappearances in British history. We have the testimony, the journals, and the haunting photograph. What we do not have is an answer to the question that haunted the Graves family. Where did Elias go when he vanished at 11:11? What was the cold place? And most disturbing of all, are they still counting? Because according to those who study this case, that specific alignment of hours and minutes may be more than just a number on a clock face. It may be a doorway. If this story has left you questioning the nature of time and the thin boundaries between our world and places we cannot see, then join us on the Forgotten Liturgy. Hit the subscribe button, silence the notification bell, because when reality is this strange, sometimes the only way to feel safe is to know the story. Until next time, remember, when the clocks fall silent, that's when the count truly begins.